All right, I think we should be good to begin then. All right. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, everyone here is doing good today. I know it's pretty early for some of us, but inshallah, we can stay focused and benefit a lot from our beloved brother's presentation. Today we have Jake Brancatella, a great Muslim brother with a bachelor's in philosophy and a master's in theology and philosophy, as well as a da'i, commonly known for his arguments against atheists and Christians. He's on the YouTube and Clubhouse and Twitter space as Jake the Muslim Metaphysician, and he'll be giving us a presentation on the LPI and inshallah followed by a Q&A. Does that sound good to you, Jake? Is there anything you want to say before we begin?
No, that's good. Alhamdulillah.
All right, inshallah, let's begin.
Okay, 1 second. All right. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum. I hope everybody is doing well. I was invited here, as the brother mentioned, to talk about what's sometimes called the logical problem of the incarnation, or you will see in the literature sometimes abbreviated LPI. Now, for people who may be familiar with my work, I'm not going to assume that anyone here is. I spend or have spent, at least in the past few years, a lot more time speaking about a different problem in Christianity, or as far as I see it, and many others, which is the logical problem of the Trinity. But this isn't the same thing, and sometimes people get confused. Maybe even some Muslims get confused about this. So I'm just going to not really assume too much because I don't know what the audience is composed of, Muslims, Christians, and how knowledgeable the people are. So anyway, the doctrine of the Trinity is the belief that there is one God that exists amongst three divine persons, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I'm not going to go too much into the logical problem of the Trinity. You can see that on my various platforms, whether it be I've written an article on the subject on my academia page, as well as spoken about it on mostly YouTube, but Twitter and other places as well. Now, the Incarnation is a distinct doctrine. Now, it's related to the Trinity in the sense that it posits or asserts that the second person of the Trinity, the Son, became a man was born of the Virgin Mary, and was named Jesus of Nazareth. Now, how exactly that works and the details of the doctrine, we'll go into a little bit more detail on that in just a few moments. But the basic idea is that the second person of the Trinity, the Son, or Jesus Christ, or whatever name you'd like to call him, the Christians would like to call him, became a man in Jesus. So that's just very briefly, but I'm going to go into more detail on what the incarnation is and what Christians basically have to affirm about it. And what I'm going to use to explain this is not my own words, not my own thoughts, not something a Muslim scholar or theologian came up with. None of that, because if we want to accurately represent what Christians believe, and not only Christians, whoever it is that we're dealing with, we should try to access their sources and see what they say about these things rather than just putting forward our own understanding. So what I'm going to use for this of explaining what Christians must affirm about the incarnation is what is sometimes called the Chalcedonian Creed. There was a ecumenical council that convened in the year 451 of the Christian era, or the Christian calendar, however you want to phrase it. And that took place because there were disputes about not whether or not Jesus was God necessarily, because that was sort of settled in the 4th century. Many people will be more familiar with the Council of Nicaea in 325 than you had the Council of Constantinople, the first one anyway, in 381. And then eventually you get to the Council of Chalcedon in the 5th century, in the middle of the 5th century in 451. So by that time, they had already basically settled, and it's we don't have enough time really to go over all of the history, but they've already settled that Jesus or the Son is fully God, right? And so there's no question really about it at that point, at least in terms of the quote unquote Orthodox, and I mean Orthodox with a lowercase o, basically what was being established at the ecumenical councils. However, there were other disputes. Now, well, okay, Jesus is fully God, but he's also a man. So how exactly does that work? How is it that there's, this being who is both fully God and fully man at the same time? And there were many debates and disputes about exactly how this works. Did Jesus have a human mind or a human soul? Some Christians who affirmed that Jesus was fully God said yes, and some said no, or some were agnostic on it and didn't really know one way or another, didn't really comment on the issue. So there were further developments, and these are what are called Christological or Christological developments or controversies. Now, the reason why I've chosen the Chalcedonian Creed is because it's affirmed and considered dogma, basically dogma, which means you must affirm it in order to be a part of these churches, which are the main branches of Christianity, the Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. It's considered dogma. You cannot reject the creed at Chalcedon. And even most Trinitarian Protestant churches accept it as being consistent with the Bible and their theology. They may not obviously say that it's necessarily dogmatic, but they believe that it faithfully teaches what they find in their Bible and in agreement with their theology. So, what does the Chalcedonian Creed say? I'm just going to read a portion from it. I can't read the whole thing, but I'm going to read, the main section that is relevant to what we're going to discuss here. So they say, following the saintly fathers, we all with one voice teach the confession of one and the same Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, the same perfect in divinity and perfect in humanity, the same truly God and truly man, of a rational soul and a body, consubstantial with the Father as regards his divinity, and the same consubstantial with us as regards his humanity, like us in all things like us in all respects except for sin, begotten before the ages from the Father as regards his divinity. And don't worry, I'm going to break this down after I read it. And in the last days, the same for us and for our salvation from Mary, the Virgin God bearer, as regards his humanity. One and the same Christ, Son, Lord, only begotten, acknowledged in two natures, which undergo no confusion, no change, no division, no separation. At no point was the difference between the natures taken away through the union, but rather the property of both natures is preserved and comes together into a single person and a single subsistent being. He is not parted or divided into two persons, but is of one and the same only begotten Son, God, Word, Lord Jesus Christ, just as the prophets taught from the beginning about him, and as the Lord Jesus Christ himself instructed us, and as the creed of the fathers handed it down to us. Since we have formulated these things with all possible accuracy and attention, the sacred and universal synod decreed that no one is permitted to produce or even to write down or compose any other creed or to think or teach otherwise. As for those who dare either to compose another creed or even to promulgate or teach or hand down another creed, for those who wish to convert to a recognition of the truth from Hellenism or from Judaism or from any kind of heresy at all, if they be bishops or clerics, the bishops are to be deposed from the episcopacy and the clerics from the clergy. If they be monks or lay folk, meaning common people, the awam, they are to be anathematized, which means basically to be declared heretics, and somebody who's under an anathema, at least as far as the church declaring it, sees that person as suitable for hell. So if they don't repent, they will be in hellfire, essentially. So now this was a mouthful. Many people are saying, wow, I mean, what the heck was Jake just reading? It sounds like a lot of nonsense and foolishness. So let me try to break down or basically summarize what is being said here. some of the key tenets being affirmed here is that Jesus is truly God and truly man. Why? It says that our Lord Jesus Christ, the same perfect in divinity and perfect in humanity, the same truly God and truly man. Okay, so it's affirming he's truly and fully God and man. Whatever it means to be God, he has or possesses or is, and the same for him being man or a human. And he's perfect in his divinity and humanity. Okay. So, in light of that, it also mentions that Jesus fully possesses two natures. Okay, he doesn't possess only one nature; he possesses fully two natures: a divine nature and a human nature. Uh, Thirdly, it also mentions that Jesus was only one person, right? See, it mentions, but rather the property of both natures, okay, so it mentions two natures, is preserved and comes together into a single person and a single subsistent being, okay? So Jesus is said to be one person, one subsistent being. And I'll explain why I'm mentioning this and why it's relevant. Now, why were they mentioning this? Because there were disputes and debates amongst the Christians at the time who believed Jesus was God and believed he was a man, but there were disagreements about how exactly that works and what exactly that means. So there was what eventually became a known as a heretical position, Monophysitism, which comes from two words, mono and physite. Mono meaning one, physite meaning nature or essence. And these were people who said that Jesus was fully God and fully man, but in virtue of the incarnation or him becoming a man, he only possessed one nature. He did not possess two natures. Okay. So that basically was declared heretical at this council. Okay. Second position that it was going against or contradicting was a position known as Nestorianism, which is the idea that Jesus was two persons when he became a man. He was both a human person and a divine person. Because remember, in the Trinity, it said that there are three persons in the Trinity. So Jesus was a person, was a divine person prior to the incarnation. When he takes on a human nature, the Nestorian said he was also a human person. So he was a divine person and a human person. He's two persons at the same time. Now, whether or not that makes sense, that's another story. Not going to get into that at the moment. And then the third position that was being, declared heretical at this council was a position known as Apollinarianism, which was, I don't want to say started because I think there are precursors to it, but it gets its name from a bishop called Apollinaris, and he held the view that Jesus did not possess a rational human mind or human soul. So the idea, and which sometimes is called in the literature word flesh Christology, sorry, it was basically the idea that yes, Jesus was man, but he did not possess a human mind or human soul. The second person of the Trinity, the Son, sort of replaced that and took the place of the rational soul or mind in Jesus. He didn't have, in addition to that, a rational or human mind or soul. Okay, so those are the positions that were being contradicted: Nestorianism, Monophysitism, or the idea that Jesus had one nature, or him being two persons, or that he did not possess a human soul or human mind. And you see that when it mentions that he was truly man, it says the same truly God and truly man of a rational soul and body, because those people who were following Apollinaris' view basically affirmed that it was God in a body, but not God with a body and human soul. Okay. So they're making clear, no, he fully possessed a human soul and body. And part of their argument and motivation was that, well, if we say that Jesus was really truly God and truly man, well, in order to be fully God, in order to be fully man, he must have had a human soul or human mind. If he didn't have a human soul or human mind, then he wasn't truly fully human. And I think that's makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, if you just see a body of a human body laying on the ground and there's doesn't, this is impossible, but let's say it doesn't have a human body, or I'm sorry, it doesn't have a human soul or human mind, we would say, well, it's not really fully human, right? It's just a human body laying there. So, I mean, it seems to make sense. If you really want to say and affirm Jesus' true and full humanity, then you would have to affirm that he had a human mind or a human soul. Okay, so let me just, because I'm looking here in my notes for a second, I want to see how to go about this next. Now, on the flip side, just to give you a little background of this, because I don't want to completely throw the people following, Apollinarianism under the bus. And William Lane Craig, who some may know in the audience, who's a popular Christian apologist, he calls himself a neo-Apollinarian. And basically, he's a heretic for this. I mean, it's not only me saying this, many people have said this, including other Protestants. And he does not believe that Jesus had a human mind or human soul. And part of the reason and motivation for that was that they thought, and William Lane Craig thought this as well, and I think this is a good point, which we'll explore later on, that if Jesus has a human mind, a human soul, and a human body, and a human spirit, if you think that's different, whatever, if he had that in addition to his divine nature and him already being a divine person, then it would seem to follow he would have to be two persons, because he had a divine nature and was already a divine person, plus he takes on everything that is sufficient, this is their argument anyway, in order to be a human person. Therefore, he must have been two persons, a divine person and a human person. But Jesus in the Gospels doesn't present himself as two persons. He doesn't speak as we. He doesn't walk around and say, we say this and we say that. He's not two people in that sense. He doesn't speak as two distinct people. He presents himself as one person, whatever you may think of him. He says, I am doing this, or I said that, or I tell you X, Y, Z. So that's sort of the tension. This is their argument as, anyway, Apollinaris and William Lane Craig and people who followed this, but now is seen heretical according to Chalcedon. If you affirm that Jesus had a human body, human mind, and human soul, in addition to him already being a divine person, he would be two persons. He's clearly not two persons. Therefore, we must have the solution. Their solution was to deny that Jesus had a human mind and human soul and just a body, and therefore he didn't count as a human person. Okay, so that's their sort of view. On the other side, the Orthodox with a lowercase o, meaning that what became established at this council and future councils, they said, well, okay, I mean, that's your problem, but you have a different problem, which is that you say that Jesus was a man, but he wasn't truly and fully a man because he didn't possess a key element that is needed in order to be a human. If you don't have a human soul, you're not really truly and fully human. And some of the church fathers said, and it became a dictum of the church, Gregory said this, that which is not assumed is not saved. And so that had, salvific implications, at least for the Orthodox. They said that if Jesus didn't take on a human soul and human mind, then he could not redeem or save human souls or human minds, right? And so that was kind of their comeback and argument. And that's where the tension is. But just to summarize what the incarnation is and what it's affirming at Chalcedon, Jesus is truly God and truly man. He fully possesses two natures, a human nature and a divine nature. He's only one person. He doesn't possess only one nature. He's not two persons. And he does possess a rational mind or human soul. Okay, so now that we have hopefully a better understanding of what the incarnation is, or at least what they're claiming verbally, what exactly is the logical problem? Somebody might say, okay, Jake, yeah, it seems weird, or I don't really understand it, but is it really a logical problem? So what is the logical problem supposed to be? So William Lane Craig, and I know a lot of Christians may not like this, but because they see him as a heretic, but he represents the problem well. So I'm just going to read an excerpt from him explaining what the problem is, and then he tries to go on and give his own solution, but I don't think it works for various reasons, which we're not really going to get into or focus on. But he says, in describing what the LPI or logical problem of the incarnation is, he says, but if anything, appears to be a contradiction, surely this is it. So, wow, he's telling you if anything looks like a contradiction, surely this is it. And what is it? He's going to tell you it's the doctrine of the Incarnation. How can Jesus be both God and man, infinite and finite, creator and creature? How can we unite in a single person, both omniscience, meaning him being all knowing, and ignorance, omnipotence, meaning him being all powerful, and weakness, moral perfection, and moral perfectibility? The attributes of deity or divinity, godhood, seem to drive out the attributes of humanity, so that it seems logically inconsistent to affirm with the historic Christian church that Jesus is truly God and truly man. So basically, he's explaining that the contradiction seems to be, at least on the surface level, or the logical problem is, how can a single person possess all of these contradictory properties? How can he be all knowing and yet not all knowing or ignorant at the same time? Meaning, how can he be God and knowing everything and yet he doesn't know the hour? He said in the Gospels to increase in wisdom in Luke chapter 2, verse 52, et cetera, et cetera. How can he be all powerful as God and yet he's weak? He can't even save himself from being, from dying on a cross, at least in the Christian narrative. How can he have moral perfection and yet not be morally perfect, et cetera, et cetera? So basically, the question is, how can a single person or single individual have two sets of attributes that contradict each other? Well, if he's truly all-knowing, then he can't be ignorant. So how is he all-knowing and ignorant at the same time? If he's truly ignorant of something, how can he be all-knowing? I mean, because he's not. So then you're on this back and forth, and it seems to be contradictory, at least on the surface of it. And at least William Lane Craig is having enough honesty to admit that. Now, it's not only William Lane Craig. I'm going to read an excerpt from James Anderson in his work Paradox in Christian Theology. So he's another Christian scholar. He says the very idea that God, an eternal, infinite, immortal, transcendent spirit, could become a human being, i.e., a temporal, finite, mortal, material creature, is one that seems prima facie, or basically on the surface of it, impossible, if not altogether absurd. So again, he's representing, at least on what the surface level is, what the problem is supposed to be. How can a single person be, immortal and yet he dies? How can he be all knowing but yet he's ignorant? How can he be all powerful but yet he's weak? It doesn't make sense. That's what he's trying to say. So this is what the problem is. Now, I mean, we could just end it there and say, oh yeah, Jake, it kind of seems silly. I mean, we don't really need to go further, but let's try to probe a little bit further and look at some proposed solutions. Now, obviously, you guys, I don't know if it was mentioned at the beginning, but I'm supposed to be lecturing or explaining this LPI for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to go to Q&A. So I don't have time to go through every single possible model of the incarnation or so-called proposed solution, but I'm going to deal with it in broad strokes that basically will cover all of the models in one way or another. Okay. So what are some proposed solutions? And if you do dawah or have listened to discussions back and forth between Muslims and Christians, then maybe you would have heard this heard of this move before, and it's called in the literature, and I know it's a mouthful, but don't worry, it'll be easy to understand, inshallah, reduplicative predication. It's called sometimes the reduplicative predication solution, or the qua move, which qua means just like with respect to. Okay, and I'll explain what it means. So you may have seen Christians respond and say, oh, Jake, it's really not a contradiction. Why? Because Christ is omniscient or all-knowing, and I'm just going to focus on, for the rest of the time, on one aspect, being all-knowing and ignorant, this apparent contradiction. So Christ is omniscient or all-knowing with respect to his divine nature, or he's all-knowing with respect to his divine nature, meaning he's not all-knowing in his human nature, he's all-knowing in his divine nature, or with respect to his divine nature. And he's not omniscient, or he lacks knowledge, or he's ignorant, or however you want to phrase it, with respect to his human nature. So there's no contradiction, right? And then we can motivate that further with sort of physical material example. I can have a single object that has opposite properties or what seems to be contradictory properties. For example, I can hold a bottle. Imagine holding a bottle in your hand, and the bottle can have a white cap or a white top on the top of it, and also not be white on the bottom half, which means that it's white and also not white. But isn't that contradictory? How could a single bottle be white and not white at the same time? Well, it's because a part of it is white, meaning the top of it is white, but yet the bottom half of the bottle is not white. Now that's not contradictory, right? I mean, we probably have held bottles in our hands like that before. So they say, or so the people who are proposing this solution say it's the same thing. There's a part of Jesus or part of Christ, which is omniscient, which is his divine nature, and there's a part of his person or part of him that is not omniscient, which is his human nature. And there's no difference between that and the bottle that is part of it is white and part of it is not white. So there you go. There's no contradiction. It's solved, right? Well, I wish it were that easy, but really it doesn't solve the problem, and I'll explain why. I'm going to read a quote here from Jonathan Hill, who is another Trinitarian Christian scholar, and he writes in a book published by Oxford called The Metaphysics of the Incarnation. It's in the introduction. He says, an important advance in recent work on the Incarnation has been the recognition that the reduplicative strategy, meaning what I just talked about, in itself operates only at the linguistic level. The reduplicative strategy is in itself a strategy that operates at the level of language only. It is a way of avoiding ascribing explicitly inconsistent properties to Christ. It is not in itself a metaphysical strategy. Now, what does he mean by that? He's going to explain it here. It does not tell us how or why Christ avoids having inconsistent properties, or how this is or how this is compatible with his being fully divine and fully human. To do that, the defender of the reduplicative strategy must go beyond mere reduplication and into metaphysics to show us why the use of this language is legitimate. Basically, he's saying it's just a linguistic solution. Okay, you're avoiding a contradiction on the level of language only or on the linguistic level, but you're not explaining to us how actually a single person could be all-knowing and not all-knowing at the same time. You're not going into the metaphysics or the reality of how this makes any sense, okay? So in order to do that, we have to go further. The reduplicative strategy is not going to work on its own, okay? Now, there are two sort of broad models that I'm going to look at. And yes, there are many different permutations on these different perspectives, but inshallah, these two models broadly will cover pretty much all of the different models, right? Broadly speaking. So the first one is sometimes called Kenotic Christology or Kenotic Christologies. And where does this come from, this word? Christology just means the study of Christ or study of Jesus. And kenotic or kenosis comes from Philippians chapter 2, which many Christians will cite to you to try to prove that Jesus is God in the New Testament. Now, Philippians chapter 2 says, and I quote, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself." That's where the word kenosis comes. Emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. So maybe you can already anticipate where this is going. Now, kenotic Christology proponents say that, yes, Jesus was fully God and fully divine, but when he became a man, he, in some sense, lost his divinity. And there are different models within, kenotic Christology. So the two broad categories here are what are sometimes called ontological and functional kenosis. Now, ontological means that he literally divested himself of certain divine attributes. For example, omniscience. He was all-knowing prior to becoming a man, but when he became a man, in virtue of emptying himself, he divested himself or removed his attribute of omniscience or being all-knowing. Right? Now, what's the obvious problem with this? The obvious problem with this is, well, then we would say he wasn't actually fully God or fully divine while he was on earth, because a necessary condition to be considered God is that you are all knowing. Well, most people accept that. I don't see any reason for denying it. The Quran is quite clear on that, and the Bible is as well. So, therefore, if Jesus lost his omniscience or got rid of it, even temporarily, then at the time while he was on earth, he couldn't be said to be fully God or fully divine, right? So, that's really not going to work, because that is going to be considered a heretical position. It's going to go against Chalcedon and him being truly and fully God or fully divine. Okay. What about the functional view? The functional kenotic view says that Jesus refrains from exercising certain divine attributes. And again, I'm using the example of omniscience. So it'll say he is omniscient while he's on earth. He still does know everything, but he refrains from exercising that omniscience. Now, what does that mean? How could you refrain from exercising your knowledge? You either know or you don't know, right, Jake? Yeah, kind of, but Christians have a way of, trying to make all of these distinctions and come up with these different ideas. And one proponent of this view is someone who I debated in writing, a Christian scholar by the name of Andrew Loke. This is many years back. And he says, for example, on talking about omniscience, Jesus does know everything, but he's not aware of these facts, meaning that he goes from having what's called a current knowledge or actual knowledge, meaning a conscious awareness of everything all at once, which God presumably has, right? God knows everything all at once. It's not like he knows everything, but it's not really fully on the top of his mind, so to speak. I know this is anthropomorphic language, but top of his mind, so to speak. It's like, for example, I know that 1 + 1 = 2, but that's not on my mind. It wasn't on my mind before I said that, right? And just as meant, I hope everybody in the audience, although with Christians, we got to watch out for, because we do know that they can't really count to 3, but that's another story. That's the logical problem of the Trinity. But I'm going to assume that everybody here knows that 1 + 1 = 2, right? So, even though everybody knows that 1 + 1 = 2, it's not on your conscious mind at every given moment. But with God, he knows everything immediately and all at once. It's not like he's waiting to think about something, or, he doesn't know it all, immediately on his mind and can't access it in that way. No. So the problem with the functional model is that it posits that God, or Jesus in this case, goes from having a current knowledge, meaning full awareness of him knowing everything all at once, to not having that full awareness or full knowledge of everything all at once. So his omniscience basically becomes potential. He's not really omniscient. He has the potential to be omniscient. It's kind of like dormant in his mind. And maybe he can, if he tries really hard, he can access the information, but it's not really readily there very easily. So the problem with both aspects of ontological and functional kenoticism is that it's heretical, because it results in Jesus not really truly being divine or fully God while he's on earth. Okay, so if that's not going to work, what about another potential model? The second broad model is what's sometimes called the two consciousnesses model, right? And this is a way to try to make sense of, well, how can we say, because just like before, remember reduplicative predication. Well, yeah, we say that Jesus is omniscient or all-knowing with respect to his divine nature, but he's ignorant with respect to his human nature. But then you say, well, how does that work? I mean, what do you mean by that? And then this is where they go into detail. They'll say that Jesus had two minds while he was on earth. He had a divine mind where he knew everything, and a human mind where he genuinely didn't know everything. So he was omniscient in his divine mind and not omniscient in his human mind. No contradiction, right, Jake? Therefore, that's the end of the story. Bye-bye, logical problem of the incarnation. Well, not so fast. Because this raises a different problem. How could Jesus have two minds and remain one person, right? And this goes back to what William Lane Craig and Apollinaris and some of these other Christians were worried about, that if you say that Jesus has two minds, or he was a divine person and he takes on a human mind, soul, and spirit, then how wouldn't he be two persons? But yet you guys are telling us that Jesus is only one person. So now you have a different contradiction. You're affirming or saying that Jesus is one person, but in reality, your position entails that Jesus must be two persons. How could he have two minds and remain one person? What does this mean? Now, I'm going to give an argument which actually a Christian, James Anderson, gives in his book to explain how this is really not satisfactory and is not going to work based on our understanding of what persons are. So he says, British philosopher P.F. Strawson, who's a very well-known philosopher, he's not a Christian, but he gives an argument about, how we should understand who or what persons are. British philosopher P.F. Strawson developed a transcendental argument for the indispensability and logical primitiveness of our concept of a person, where person is taken to denote that type of entity to which both mental states, example, being in pain, and physical states, example, lying down, may be simultaneously and unequivocally ascribed. Okay, so he's setting up the argument, which I'm going to tell you now, that Strawson gives as to why our concept of person is a primitive concept that is meant to denote an entity to which both mental and physical states can be ascribed to. So here's a summary of the argument as far as Anderson understands it, and I believe it's accurate. So premise one, the possibility of ascribing experiences to oneself, meaning to yourself, presupposes the possibility of ascribing experiences to others, to other people, of the same type as oneself. The possibility, and then two, the possibility of ascribing experiences to others presupposes the possibility of distinguishing or individuating, meaning making a difference, between different subjects of experience. Number three, the possibility of distinguishing different subjects of experiences presupposes that those subjects are of a certain logically primitive type, such that both mental and physical states may be ascribed to individuals of that type. And four, therefore, the possibility of ascribing experiences to oneself presupposes that one, meaning you, just are that certain logically primitive type of entity, a person. Okay, so this is an argument to try to explain what a person is. But when I go further, you'll have a better understand what we're getting at. So Anderson then further says, in trying to criticize this two-conscious model, he says, for if we think once more of the requirements of identifying reference in speech to particular states of consciousness or private experiences, we see that such particulars cannot be thus identifyingly referred to except as the states of or experiences of some identified person. Here's the key part. States or experiences, we might say, owe their identity as particulars to the identity of the person whose states or experiences they are. Meaning, a person is an entity who has states or experiences, has the mental state of, unfortunately, listening to Jake speak about the logical problem of the Trinity, or sorry, logical problem of the Incarnation at the moment, or having the mental state of, drinking from a cup of water, or whatever it is, or physically feeling your clothes against your legs, or, opening a door, let's say. All of these things, these different states and experiences that you have, okay, presuppose the entity of a person. A person is an entity who has different states and experiences. And how do we know what is how one person is different from another. We identify that one person is different from another based on the fact that they have different experiences and different states of mind. Okay. So why is this a problem for the two consciousness view? You'll see in just a second. Anderson continues, it should not be difficult to see that Strawson's argument presents grave difficulties for a dual psychology model, such as Morris's. Morris is a Christian who tried to represent a view of Jesus having two consciousnesses or two minds. If claims about Jesus possessing two distinct ranges of consciousness, two distinct sets of experiences, beliefs, etc., are to be coherent, then it must be possible to refer to those mental features without those features being necessarily owned by any particular person. Yet this is precisely what our concept of a person rules out. If experiences are necessarily individuated with respect to persons, then at the most fundamental logical level, it makes no sense to speak of one person with two distinct consciousnesses, in the sense that each consciousness might in principle be ascribed to a different person than the other. In other words, the idea that one person is different from another, the only way we know that, or one of the key ways that we know that, is by each person having a distinct experience or let's say beliefs or states, mental states. And so if Jesus literally had two distinct ranges of consciousness or two sets of experiences or beliefs, then they couldn't be had by the same person, because the way that we distinguish persons is by them having different beliefs or different experiences. And so if Jesus had two different sets of experiences and beliefs, he would be two different persons. That's basically the summary of the argument. And I'm almost done, guys. Don't worry. Then further, he says, if persons and not minds are logically primary subjects of experiences and other mental states, then it makes no more sense to say that Christ believed that water is H2O with respect to his divine mind, but did not believe that water is H2O with respect to his human mind, than it does to say Christ broke bread with respect to his hands, but did not break bread with respect to his feet. A person either breaks bread or he does not. Likewise, a person either believes that water is H2O or he does not. To try to isolate two distinct minds or consciousnesses within a single person, as Morris seeks to do, is to kick against the goads of the very concepts needed to formulate the Christological problem in the first place, meaning against the concept of what a person is. If this criticism of Morris's dual psychology interpretation of the Incarnation is on target, then it sounds a death knell for all such interpretations, regardless of the details and defensive strategies of each case. Meaning, as I said earlier, I can't go through every single type of dual psychology example, but this criticism will apply to all of them. So if it's successful against Morris's model, it's going to be successful against all of them. The specific details and defense strategies and response by different dual psychology proponents or two, let's say, consciousness models doesn't really affect the argument. It still goes through. And then last but not least, this is the last part that I'm going to read, where Anderson says, either Christ possessed genuine human beliefs, not mere inclinations to belief, or he did not. If he did, meaning he did possess those human beliefs, then those beliefs cannot have conflicted at any time with his divine beliefs, meaning he can't be said to know the hour in his divine nature, but not know it in his human nature, human mind, or in his human beliefs. So then those beliefs cannot have conflicted at any time with his divine beliefs, because beliefs are fundamentally ascribable to persons, and a person cannot exhibit contradictory belief states. He can't know at the same time, the same person, that he knows the hour and doesn't know the hour. I mean, it's bizarre. If he did not, then it is hard to see why Christ should be thought of as sharing our human condition in every relevant respect. Okay, so what do you have here in summary? You have The LPI, or logical problem of the incarnation, is how a single person can have contradictory properties. How is he all-knowing and ignorant? How is he all-powerful and weak at the same time? We saw that a common strategy, or what I would say is like, the first move of the Christian, is to say, well, he was all-knowing and all-powerful in his divine nature, and he was ignorant and weak in his human nature. As I read from Jonathan Hill earlier, that's only a linguistic solution. You're just making that claim and saying something, but you're not explaining, well, how does that work? It still seems like strange and bizarre. Now, two main broad theories or models to try to solve this are Kenoticism and dual psychology models. The problem with Kenoticism is it's heretical. Why? Because it eventually leads to Jesus not being truly or fully divine while on earth, because he's divesting himself of certain attributes or choosing not to express them. Still the same problem. And then when it comes to dual psychology models, it has the problem of, well, how does Jesus really have two minds and yet he's only one person? No, if he has two minds, two consciousnesses, two sets of beliefs and rational faculties, then he must be two persons. But Chalcedon says that Jesus was only one person. Therefore, it contradicts orthodoxy, or at least the entailments of it contradict the orthodox position. And therefore, you're back to square one. So, what are the options then? What can Christians do, or how can they respond? Well, basically choose your heresy. Either Jesus wasn't truly God, as we found in Kenoticism, or wasn't fully man in the case of Apollinarianism, meaning he didn't have a human soul or human mind, or he wasn't one person in Nestorianism. Those are all heretical positions. You can choose one of them, but then it would just go against Chalcedon and the doctrine of the incarnation. So then it wouldn't be that the argument is unsuccessful, it's successful, but you're just biting the bullet and taking a heretical position. Or you can choose to hold the position of ineffable mystery. Oh, Jake, basically we have no idea how this works. We're just affirming things. We're just saying that we believe Jesus is God and fully man. We have no idea what it even really means. And so this is strange. I mean, it's kind of like in the Islamic tradition. I don't know who we have here, but make no mistake about it, I'm a Salafi or Athari in Aqidah. So anybody who's not happy with what I'm about to say, anyway, it's your problem, really, not mine. It's kind of like the position of tafweed, where you say, yeah, you're affirming these words, but you don't really know the meaning of what you're saying. Well, no, we say we know the meaning, even though if we don't, understand all of the intricate details. Whereas the position of tafweed, at least al-ma'na, not kayfiyya, is that no, we're saying that we don't even know the meaning. We don't really even know what we're affirming and we're saying, right? They don't even understand the basics of what they're actually affirming. So that's the problem with this ineffable mystery position. Or you can accept that it's a contradictory doctrine, and some people do that. I don't think it makes much sense, because true contradictions don't exist, right? There's no such thing as a square circle or married bachelor. These are just words massed together, but they don't have any reality to them. But J.C. Beale, who's a Christian, he's a proponent of this position. He admits everything. He says, yeah, Jake, you're right. It's contradictory, but it's still true. Well, okay. Thank you. I'm not going to accept that. But another option is, well, you can admit that it's contradictory and therefore reject it. And that's what we hope for, at least Muslims anyway. And we invite those people to Islam to actually accept that it is a contradictory doctrine. Doesn't make any sense. Don't waste your time, going through these jumps and hooks. See that it doesn't make sense, and maybe explore the Islamic conception of Jesus, or Isa alayhi salam, that he was, yes, one person with one nature. He was a fully human. He was not God. He was a prophet of God. He was a Messiah who foretold the coming of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. And he was a amazing human being that we, seek to emulate. But he was not God. Okay. And of course, he did many miracles, and he was born of a virgin, et cetera, et cetera. But we stop there. We don't go further and make him more than he is, and say that he's God. Astaghfirullah. So anyway, that's what I'm inviting you guys to. That's basically a summary of this lecture. And I think I went about 3 or 4 minutes over, but now I think we'll invite people to ask some questions, inshallah. Barakallah feek
Assalamu
for
alaikum
listening.
wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We appreciate that, Brother Jake. I want to say publicly that we're a Salafi Athari server upon the Aqidah of the Sahaba, walillah alhamd. And yeah, I think the
Alhamdulillah.
Q&A is gonna start now. Brother Titan, you got this.
Inshallah. Before, I just want to mention a few things before you begin the Q&A. Firstly, I want to say thank you, Jazakallah khair, Brother Jake, for this presentation. I also want to say a few
Well, yeah.
things about the questions themselves. Firstly, I want to say that people have a lot of questions, of course, right? Let's try to stick to the LPI, and inshallah, maybe later on, if Jake would want to branch into other things, we can do that. But let's try to stay on topic. Um, I know I got word that someone is sending people to try to come here and say bad things. Inshallah, if you say anything insulting, anything insulting, you curse, anything like that, you will be banned. So just a warning to everyone here. Let's try to keep it respectful, have some courtesy, inshallah. And this isn't a debate. There's no going back and forth. If you felt that your question's been misunderstood, then let me know, and inshallah you can re-clarify. But let's try to not make a debate where we're going on for 5-10 minutes. Does that sound good to you, Brother Jake?
Yeah, yeah. That's good,
All right,
inshallah.
inshallah. Let's begin then with Professor Moons, inshallah. Sent him the invite. There we go.
Hey, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
How you
excellent.
doing?
Hey, this is good. This is a really good presentation, by the way. I just want to, like someone mentioned you were presenting, I was like, oh, I got to support my students. So this was good. I was really proud to clearly been also. So I've got a slight pushback on the initial definition. Just looking a little bit about a big God.
Is it just me or is it hard to hear Ryan? I can't hear you too well.
Yeah, their mic is a little fuzzy.
Try this. Okay. What about now?
It's a lot better.
Screen.
It's
Yeah,
a lot
it's
better.
good.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Yeah. So, did I send you my little book about a big god?
I don't think so. I know I'm aware of it, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Okay, so there's an argument. I've got this argument that omniscience is not the perfection; that there's something more fundamental that's the perfection. And I think this could help out the canonicists. So I just want to kind of get your thoughts on this. So the idea is that omnipotence is the most power-granting set of abilities and no liabilities. And one of those power granting abilities is maximal cognitive excellence, like the ability to know all the things, the ability to know all the things in the right kind of way, the ability to be like, rational and always appropriately responsive to reasons. So it's all about abilities or a power. And a power can be exercised or not exercised, or manifested or not manifested. And so what this would mean is that omniscience is not the perfection, because in order to know all the things, you already have to have something more fundamental, which is this power to know all the things. So if you accept that, which I don't know if you do, so that's why I'm setting it up this way. If you accept that, then the canonicists can say, well, look, omniscience, that's not really the perfection anyway. So when we look at the case of Christ, we're looking at someone who has the ability to know all things, but they're not currently exercising that ability. So I'm just curious what you think about that.
Hmm. Yeah. So a couple things. I mean, the first thing, and this is kind of the part of the problem with the perfect being theology, is it kind of gets a little subjective, right? But to me, it just seems obvious on the face of it that it's a greater perfection to know everything rather than merely to have the potential or the possibility to know everything, right? Like for just as an example, right? As a human being, there are many things that I have the potential to know. Obviously, not everything in the sense that I'm not God, but um, I have to do some studying, right? I have to do some work, and for people who don't know, Ryan is one of my professors, so I'm actually happy that he's here. But you, as a human being, have the potential to know many things. But how do we view that, even when it comes to human beings? What is greater? to just say, oh yeah, Jake, you have the possibility to actually go out and learn and study, let's say the Quran as a Muslim, or you have the ability to go and study French, or I don't know, different languages, right? Yeah, of course, I have the ability to do that, and to have that, I have the potential to know those things. But how do we view that versus a lazy bum who's just sitting on his couch and saying, yes, I could do that. I could, go and study and learn something and gain this knowledge, versus someone who actually knows, right? In reality, currently has that knowledge. Right? We don't give awards to the guy who says, yeah, I have the ability to actually write my PhD thesis, but I haven't done it yet. No, I mean, we give him the award, and we say that it's actually he's doing something good when he's going out learning and he is actually having that knowledge. It's not merely potential. So that's one pushback that I would give. I mean, you can come back on that in a second. My second response is going to be, I think, much shorter. Is that I think that this position is not going to be orthodox, in the sense that, and I know orthodoxy is kind of up for debate, right? I understand that, but if you look at, I think, the early Christian theologians, and how they understood, especially after Jesus is clearly understood to be God in the Christian context. I don't think anyone really had this view of canonicism. I don't think it was a historically represented view. Why? Because if that were the case, then we would see from their exegesis of Scripture, because this is a problem. Like, at least on the surface level of it, everybody knows, especially people familiar with these Muslim and Christian dialogues. The famous verse about Jesus not knowing the hour, or as Luke 2:52 says, him growing in wisdom, right? If you see how the Christian theologians respond to these, at least prima facie, contradictions and problems, you don't see them. At least for me, maybe I've missed it, right? So from my research, you don't see them exegeting those scriptures in that way and responding accordingly, right? So I don't really see it as an early attested view. But obviously, that would take a lot more time for me to substantiate. But that's preliminarily what I would say. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I've got a lot of thoughts, but I don't know. I just wanted to ask a question because I was just curious what you had to think. But I'll concede the floor to everyone else. But yeah, this is a really good presentation. So well done.
All right, thank you, Young.
All right, we appreciate that question. Let's go to the next. Guys, there's a lot of people requesting, so I'm going to have to try to go in order. The next person we have is Khalid in line, so let's bring Khalid up. Inshallah. All right, you can go ahead with your question.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I have a question particular regarding like early, if that's fine, early like the early people that believed of Jesus, like who was Jesus particularly. Regarding the groups that were living around Jesus, or particularly during the time when he was crucified, or around that time, or while he was living, was there any particular view that people withheld that were not the majority view, or what were some of the views that were withheld at the time that we have records of regarding who Jesus was, of like quote unquote Christians at the time? That's my question.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, so I mean, with respect to the question about him being God or not, right? There were clearly Christians who, or what they would be called as Christians, like the Ebionites, or other than them, who believed that Jesus was merely a man. They did not believe that he was God. Now, I don't hold the position that these other views weren't represented. I don't believe Trinitarianism existed in the early centuries. That's another story. But some people, some Christians believe that Jesus was God or divine in some sense. But I don't think that the early Christians actually believed that he was the Most High God, equal to the Father. And I've given arguments for that that you can find. I mainly, one of the ways that I try to substantiate that is by going through the works of the early church fathers, who, basically the scholars of the Christian community in the first 3 centuries. And I try to show that I don't think any of them actually believed that Jesus was the Most High God. Many of them did believe that he was God or divine in some sense, but not equal to the Father. But you do have people who, I'm not going to say that they were Muslims necessarily, but that had a mere man Christology. They did believe that he was a Messiah and born of a virgin, but they did not believe that he was God or divine in even any sense. And one example of how you can see this represented in the works of someone like Justin Martyr is that Justin Martyr in his dialogue with Trypho, and whether or not it was a real dialogue is another story, but in that dialogue, he actually represents, or not for himself, but mentions a group who believes that Jesus is the Christ or the Messiah. But they don't agree with him that he's divine or God in some sense. And the reason why he brings this up is because he's trying to convince in the dialogue Trypho, a Jew at the time, to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Now, he's also trying to prove to him that he's this, sort of divine or semi-divine figure who appears in the Old Testament in the name of God and as angel of the Lord and etc. But he gets to a certain point where he basically says, well, hey, look, okay, you don't have to necessarily believe this. There are other people who are Christians like myself who I don't agree with them about it, but they believe that he's the Messiah and that he was sent by God, but they don't agree with me that he's divine, right? In any sense. So even within that, and somebody like Justin Martyr, who's an early 2nd century writer, you see him representing, or it shows historically that there existed at that time early Christians who believed that Jesus was a Messiah and merely a man, not divine in any sense. So I hope that helps. I mean, there's a lot that could be said about it, but we don't have time.
Yeah, that clarifies it. And like one last thing regarding the idea that like the withheld idea that Jesus has two natures, right? Has this been withheld by any early church fathers that Jesus has, like, okay, like there are, you said some believes that they had like Jesus had like two minds or two natures or any of that. Was that withheld by any early church father like residing like 1st century early church father that like mentioned, okay, like in with respect to his divinity or with respect to his nature, like human nature? Was that an idea that's withheld at the time, or?
I'm not aware of them talking about two minds. No, I'm not aware of that.
Oh,
Not in the first or early centuries. You do find that definitely in the getting to the, well, I would say, yeah. The earliest that I'm aware of it is in the 4th century. Is when you see stuff like that talking about two natures and what may be interpreted as two minds or something similar to that.
okay, that clarifies it. And the two natures being a thing, was that attested to by any person 1st century, during Jesus' life, or do we have any accounts of that? Like people saying, okay, this is how we understand Jesus, or some people withheld that view at the time. Was there any church fathers or saints that withheld that while they were writing?
I'm not aware of that precise language being used in that way. No, I'm not aware of that.
All right. Thank you for the question, Khalid. Sorry for whoever dropped him. Just let's try to keep it. I wasn't too bothered by it, but let's just try to keep it, one question and try to keep it short because we have a lot of people requesting as well. So I'm gonna go to Adam next, and then we should have Leafy, and then Aman after that, and then we'll continue. So next person is Adam. All right, Adam, go ahead with your question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Okay. This question may be oddly specific, but I was wondering. So, does the I'll post it in the chat here. Maybe that'll make it clear. This shifts the principal subject objection mentioned by J.C. Beale in his book, The Contradictory Christ. Does that apply to Timothy Paul's concretist view? Let me send a specific image. Maybe that will be helpful.
Okay, I'll have to look. Let me see. Let's see. The highlighted part on the bottom, that's what you want me to read?
Yeah, there's two highlighted parts. Yeah.
Yeah. The charge of a multiplication of subjects and shifting of principal subjects is spot on. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. Senior raises at least the spirit of the same shifts the principal subject objection, but does so in the letter of Nestorian red flags. And it goes on, mentions cross, blah, blah, blah. I'm assuming that's Richard Cross. Anyway, as far as Timothy Paul's model goes, yeah, I think he has the same sort of problem with two subjects in Christ or two persons. And interestingly enough, I mean, Ryan, who just came up here earlier, Dr. Ryan Mullins, he had a conversation which I think is very beneficial for people to check out. He had a conversation with Timothy Paul on Timothy Paul's Christology, and I don't want to speak for Ryan, but it was kind of my conclusion, and I spoke to him about it. I think he kind of agrees. And Timothy Paul in that conversation, to be fair, I think he just kind of admitted it. Really, it's just an appeal to mystery at some point where once Ryan started asking him, and I don't remember exactly all of the questions, but once they got further and further along the way, it became clear that Timothy Paul didn't really have any good answers to solving how he avoids Nestorianism or there being two persons in Christ or two subjects. So I recommend for people to go and watch that conversation, and I think that it would be helpful.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Someone asked me to ask about the end hypostasis and hypostasis. One starts with a E and the other one starts with an A. Someone told me to ask about that. So, what are your thoughts on that?
In what respect?
Like, in regard to solving the LPI, supposedly.
I mean, I would have to listen to how they think it solves it. I don't think it solves anything. I would have to listen to what they think.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Fair enough. Anyways, thank you. I can be dropped off.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
We appreciate you, Adam. Thank you, man. You're the goat. All right. Okay, guys. Just saying again, it's gonna take some time because there's like 10 people requesting right now anyway. So okay, like I said, next is Leafy, and then it's gonna go to Amon. So got Leafy next, inshallah. Go ahead with your question.
Alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Alaikum salam.
First of all, I want to thank Jake for his contribution to the dawah. I know his contribution has been like very valuable to a lot of the brothers here, and his videos have kind of become like a reference for the different apologetics that we experience when giving dawah. So first of all, I want to thank you for that. My question is in regards to the different views on necessitarianism, so the appeal to mystery. Because a lot of the time the Christian is just happy to kind of just take the punch and accept that it's a contradiction. And they're happy to just kind of say, well, who cares about logic? And why should we even think to begin with that logic applies to God at all? So I want to ask you specifically, what are your views on that? And if you could break down the different types of appeal to mystery. Jazakallah.
Okay, yeah, so that's a good question. So I think part of what I was quoting from earlier, James Anderson's book, and just to be transparent, I don't want it to seem like I'm misrepresenting him anyway. He is, in my opinion, from what I've seen, and I haven't read everything, I haven't read all of the literature on the subject, but from what I'm aware of, he presents the most sophisticated defense of Mysterianism. And what he tries to do with both the Trinity and the Incarnation is he'll agree with much of what I had to say, right? And part of the reason why I was quoting him, he'll say, okay, here's what the problem is, because many Christians will say complete opposite of what you said. Actually, they'll say, oh, Jake, there actually is no problem. It's kind of like going into a math class and you go and you sit down and the professor writes a big math problem to solve on the board. And then the Christian comes along, and this is the analogy anyway, and says, oh, there's no problem even on the board, right? So we have to get some common ground first and say, yeah, at least on the surface level, there's a problem, okay, and agree on what it's supposed to be. James Anderson agrees with that. But then he then goes further and says, here are the proposed solutions of what people have tried to come up with over the past, 2,000 years. And none of these solutions is successful. None of them actually really works to solve the fundamental problems. They either fall into heresy or remain contradictory or don't solve anything, et cetera, et cetera. So then, I mean, if he admits that, many people will say, okay, Jake, but then why is he still a Christian? Why does he still believe in this doctrine of the Incarnation? Well, it's because he'll argue that he has independent reasons for believing that the doctrine is true, right? For example, believing that the Bible is the word. Obviously, I don't believe this, but I'm just giving his argument. Believing that the Bible is the word of God, believing that Jesus was divine and human at the same time. And so, even if he can't spell out and explain and resolve all of these problems that we've been discussing and that he mentions in his book, it's fine because he has good independent reasons and arguments and evidence to get him to that conclusion. Now, I would just say, well, I think that maybe the problem is that he's putting too much weight in what he thinks are those good independent evidences for the doctrine. And I think one of the telltale signs of that is that the doctrine does appear to be apparently contradictory, and there's not a good solution for it. Therefore, I think he should revise and take a look again at the doctrine itself and why he thinks he has good reasons to believe in it to begin with. But in terms of Mysterianism, he's from my perspective, the best attempted defense of it, and you can read it in the book that I quoted from earlier. But why is it problematic? It's problematic because one of the difficulties that he has is, how do you tell the difference between an apparent contradiction and an actual contradiction? Meaning, at what point does an apparent contradiction, something that looks contradictory, it smells contradictory, but it's not actually contradictory, even if I can't explain to you why or explain to you how?
So like the distinction between a paradox and a true contradiction, because a lot of the times they'll say that there's like a surface level or intuitive contradiction. Like, for example, in quantum mechanics, it seems counterintuitive. How can two things be in different places at the same time, right? But that's not a true contradiction because we can observe it like via experiments and whatever, the double slit experiment, for example. So they would say, oh, it's more akin to that more than the true contradiction. Or sometimes I've seen different apologists say, for example, bite the bullet entirely and say, look, it is a true contradiction, but I'm going to use a different logic system altogether. Like, for example, paraconsistent logic, and just concede like the principle of explosion and say, it's all fine anyway. I'm just going to bite the bullet on all of it.
Yeah, I mean, with these kind of people, what you have to understand, and what I want people to understand in general, is that make no mistake about it. Every argument that's made has certain baseline fundamental assumptions. Okay, so one of the fundamental assumptions in this argument is that classical logic is true, meaning law of non-contradiction, excluded middle. Okay, these logical axioms that they're true. I didn't give an independent argument for them. I mean, there are people who try to do that, and it's kind of difficult. But anyway, there are certain foundational assumptions in the argument. One of them is that true contradictions don't exist, that married bachelors and square circles and these type of things, or the case of if you believe that Jesus is a contradictory being, they couldn't possibly exist because contradictions can exist. Now, if the person turns around and says, well, yeah, okay, that's fine. They go even further than James Anderson. Yeah, it's not an apparent contradiction. It's an actual contradiction, but it's true. I mean, for the most part, those people will say, okay, thank you, sir. Have a nice day. I mean, I can try to give independent reasons or arguments for why they shouldn't affirm true contradictions and the implications that it may have. But at a certain point, if that's where they're just going to stand, then we're just on two different platforms. You know what I mean? And most people are not going to accept that. And to be fair, I don't want to seem as if we're representing most Christians as saying that, because J.C. Beale is seen as kind of a maverick in that way. And most Christians wouldn't agree with that. At the very least, they would say, well, it looks like a contradiction. It's not an actual one, even if I can't explain to you how, similar to how Anderson says. But they really don't, at least the theologians. I mean, people on Discord or TikTok or whatever, they might be saying anything. They come up with whatever they want. But I don't really see much of a problem with it, because I don't think it's going to be convincing to many people. Imagine if Ryan Mullins came up and said, yeah, Jake, I mean, he did say it was a good presentation. Oh, this is a good presentation and discussion. You're right about everything. It's a contradiction, but it's still true. And we would say, wow. I mean, most people would start thinking, is Ryan okay? I mean, what's going on with him? I'm surprised we even invited him for a Discord lecture before, I think, which you guys did. So my thing is that from a practical standpoint, I don't think it's going to convince many people that, oh yeah, it's contradiction, but just accept it. No. But on the other side, I think the claiming that it's merely an apparent contradiction is more, worthy of consideration, because there are certain difficulties that everyone has to deal with. However, I think when pressed, Anderson is going to have a difficult time really giving a good explanation as to how he knows the difference between an apparent contradiction and an actual one. And if you want to see a good discussion, which I actually forgot, I should just mention this from the beginning and stop talking. There's a good conversation between J.C. Beale and James Anderson on this very topic. J.C. Beale is arguing that it is contradictory and it's true. And Anderson is saying, hey, no, you're crazy, buddy. It looks contradictory, but it's not actually contradictory. And they go back and forth. And so that's available on YouTube, and I'd recommend watching it. It's probably be more helpful than my explanation, but it's very interesting.
All right. Thank you for the answer. There's going to be a lot of questions again, guys. So I'm going to try to. Firstly, I'm going to ask some questions people send me in DMs, and then I'm going to go to the next person, which is going to be Dior. Okay, so this question is from a friend of mine named Abu Lufi. His question was regarding an old argument of yours called "Who is ignorant of the hour?" He asked you to formulate it quickly for the audience, and that was his question.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, I guess it's related to the question that we mentioned earlier. So, when we say that, okay, you say Jesus is God and he's a man, but how can he be God? Because in the New Testament it says that he doesn't know the hour. So some Christians will accept that and say, yeah, he doesn't know the hour, but that means he doesn't know the hour in his human nature. But the whole problem with that is that it leaves it on a level of the nature. If I ask you who does not know the hour, you would have to say Jesus. You'd have to say the Son. I didn't ask you what doesn't know the hour, because the nature is a what, it's not a who. So if I ask you who is the subject of ignorance, who does not know the hour, then you would have to say Jesus. But then if I ask you, well, who is also the one who knows the hour, you would also have to say Jesus or the Son. So now you have a single person with two sets of contradictory beliefs. He both knows the hour and he doesn't know the hour. And that's where the apparent contradiction is. Now, this is where you may have some people who want to come in and say, well, Jesus had two minds. He had a divine mind and a human mind. But as I pointed out earlier, from the argument from Strawson, as was laid out by Anderson, that seems to entail that Jesus was actually two persons, which is a heresy known as Nestorianism. So there's steps to the argument. I mean, you can sort of make an immediate move to try to avoid a contradiction, but inevitably will lead to some other further problem. And in this case, it'll lead to Nestorianism, most likely.
Okay, thank you for that answer. So we're gonna bring up Dior next, inshallah. All right. All right, Dior, if your question goes.
Assalamu alaikum, man.
Wa alaikum
So,
assalam wa rahmatullah.
Hayakumullah. So the question is, so what's the wisdom in debating like aqidah with like Christians? For example, let's say a Christian, he debates me, right? And he proves to me that ADS is true. That's not gonna make me like change my religion. I'm just gonna become like a Mu'tazili Muslim. And if I prove to him that like affirming the attributes is the more logical, he could just affirm the attributes within the Bible. So what's the wisdom behind these like debates? Because they're not gonna defeat Christianity and they're not gonna defeat Islam. So is it more like to defend the aqidah? So like how do you see it?
Well, is that question in reference to this lecture or just more generally? Because
It's more
I
general.
see it. Okay, because I see a difference. Like what I'm doing here is, if a Christian thinks that my argument is sound and is correct, then yes, if they're Trinitarian and they believe Jesus is God, they would abandon that belief, right? They might not automatically become a Muslim. I mean, they may start then having an interest and be more willing and open to listen to what Islam has to say and what it teaches. But I'm not like arguing just about like, oh, what attributes this person has, or no. I mean, this is a foundational belief, the Trinity and Incarnation. These are foundational beliefs. But for the people who are doing what you said, like debating the intricacies of aqidah, like debating divine simplicity with a Christian, I'm trying to think, when have I done that? Yeah, I don't think it really makes much sense. Like, I would not debate. I would not have a formal debate with a Christian on divine simplicity. I don't think that there's really any point to it. So I agree with that, if that's what you mean. Because if I disprove divine simplicity or his understanding of it, he can just adopt another position within Christianity, still be a Trinitarian, still worship Jesus as God, and yet just reject divine simplicity. So yeah, I don't think wouldn't have like a debate just on that subject. But if a Christian who does believe in divine simplicity has questions for me about my position, my aqidah, when it comes to affirming the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then I'll answer his questions if he has questions about that.
I thank you, man. I just
Yeah.
want to give a big shout out to Imam al-Nawawi, man. Like people in the chat, they're talking about him. So
This guy, bro. Okay. So let's see what the next question is. Next question is gonna be from. Let's try to keep the questions quicker this time, guys, because we don't have a lot more time. We have like 11 people, and I have 2 people DMing me about questions. So let's please try to hurry it up. Next is Aman. You can come up, Aman. Inshallah, give your question.
Yo, salamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I had a question actually from my friend Ice Cube. So he's asking like where Christians believe that the divine essence is. So is it everywhere or is it bila makan?
Well, it depends on what kind of Christian you ask, but the mainstream Christian position is that it's without a place. That God is outside of space and time. That's the mainstream position. I mean, Ryan wouldn't agree with that, at least in terms of the temporality. But yeah, the sort of mainstream Christian position is that the divine essence is without a place. That God Himself is without a place.
All right.
So they're
Okay, thank
basically
you.
Japanese, if that's what you want to know.
Yeah, that was my question. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the question, Ahmad.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Brother Jake, do you think those Christians took some, or at least were influenced by our, let's say, Kalami philosophy debates, meaning where the Ash'aris and Maturidis debate for Allah being Bila Makan? Do you think that at least Christians were influenced by this?
I'm not sure. I haven't looked into it enough, to be honest. I would have to really look at the historical back and forth. I know there definitely was an exchange of ideas, but usually it's framed in the opposite way. Usually it's said that some of the Muslims, unfortunately, like the Ash'aris and the Maturidis and those who hold this belief, that they were actually influenced by the Christians. So usually it's said the other way around. But yeah, I haven't done enough research on it to really give you a clear answer.
Allah musta'an. Barakallah feek. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, okay, so the next questioner is going to be GP Stevens. And then we're going to get Moses, and then we're going to get Eric after, and then Moses after. So go ahead, GP, with your question.
Is my mic working?
Yes, it's working.
Yes.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My question pertains to, I guess, non-Chalcedonian approaches for like the incarnation or other models. So I guess the way to preface this is one common analogy, or I guess the most common analogy you'll get when you ask about the incarnation, and you'll find this like in early literature, like from Augustine and so on. They'll tell you, well, the human body is something tangible and the human soul is something intangible. And it seems that if we delegate these properties to like some parts as opposed to the whole, like a more mereological approach. So if we say that the natures actually are their own property bearers and the properties are not transitive to like the person of Christ. So we could say that like the divine nature is omnipotent, omniscient, etc., and the human nature is not. But Christ himself, like the properties of the nature wouldn't apply to him. Obviously, I think this is like pretty metaphysically obscure and bloated, but I was wondering what your thoughts are of a apartheid model when it comes to like the properties of the natures of Christ.
Yeah, I mean, insofar as I understand you, that would entail that Christ literally was the bearer of no properties at all. Because you're saying, unless you want to say that he's the bearer of the divine properties, but not the um, properties of the human nature. But if fundamentally the properties are only at the level of the nature, and you don't have what's called basically the communication of idioms or communication of attributes, then get ascribed to the person, then literally you would have Christ not bearing any properties at all in terms of him as a person. It would only be on level of nature, which just seems ridiculous. I don't know. I'm not aware of anybody saying that.
Should I add on, or I can just drop now? Thank you for answering my question. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, GP. Okay, Jake, how many questions would you say you'd be willing to answer? Because we do have like 15 more questions. Like, how many do you think you'd be good to go through?
Oh, I'm gonna have to cut it short, unfortunately, because we agreed for like an hour and a half,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
I made plans. So we
All
can
right.
go for another like 5 minutes. I'll try to answer them very quickly.
Okay. Then I'm gonna go first with Abdul Karim because he's been waiting for quite some time. Abdul Karim. All right, there we go.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can you guys hear me?
Alaikum salam. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, beautiful. My question would be simply just to like for some people who aren't as learned in philosophy or like these like logical issues, how would you summarize the logical problem of the Trinity?
Oh, the logical problem of the Trinity? That's easy. It's just Christians say that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are God. Well, if they're all God, then that would mean that they're three gods, because the basic way in which we count, 1 + 1 + 1 equals 3. So Father, Son, Spirit, they're each God. They're
Yeah.
not the same, so they would count as three gods. But Christians claim that they're only one God, so that's the contradiction. Is that what they actually are? What their position actually entails is three gods, but they claim there's only one God, so they're contradicting themselves.
All right, thank you for the question. Sorry for kicking you early. I just wanted to keep it going. Next is going to be Moses, inshallah. Unless he doesn't come up. Okay, Moses, go ahead.
Nice to meet you, first of all. My position is kind of the mereological approach to Christology. I'm not a Trinitarian. I don't believe that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are intra-divine relations. I would say that those would be extrinsically adventient, maybe relational tropes. So if like a subject stands in relation to another object in virtue of a nature, then that relational trope can obtain. So the relations would be nature index. Do you see an immediate problem with that? Just out the gate.
So, but you said you're not a Trinitarian, but I
I
just want
believe
to
in the
understand.
incarnation. Yes.
Yeah. So, are you a modalist?
I wouldn't consider myself a modalist. My Christolic, like where I have sonship, for me, son signifies the concurrence of two natures in one hypostasis.
But is the Son eternal?
In some sense, his hypostasis is eternal, but the mode of sonship is not eternal.
Okay, because you said that son, the term "son" refers to the union of the natures.
The
So
composite
that's what I'm saying.
hypostasis. Yes.
Yeah. So how would you have a son if the human nature doesn't exist eternally?
Well, for me, son is not an intra-divine relation. It doesn't pick out a hypostasis, and instead it's a relational extrinsic trope. So Christ would be the resultant of the composition of the two qualitatively distinct concrete particulars and one hypostasis, right? And the one
Mhm.
subject can instantiate this relation as he stands in relation to another object.
So there's only one person in the Trinity,
Well, I don't
or
believe in
in
Trinity, but
God.
yes, one person in God. I just would
Okay.
believe that these relations are nature indexed.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Just real quick, Moses, if you can try to like just make it
Yeah.
short and sweet. Yeah, and
Just
then
I
I'll.
want to get just to get to the Christology part, right? I consider the Son as a composite being, of which his human nature serves as a concrete part, and I can distinguish between predications that are after Christ simply, in his hypostasis, because his hypostasis, I would say, is eternal, and those predications that are apt of his human nature, being apart, because the human nature is terminated in the supposit. So, Eleanor Stump, who's another Christologist, would say that Christ can borrow properties from one of its parts, piggybacking of the whole upon its parts to allow for human predicates to be assigned to the divine person without contradiction. How do you feel
Mhm.
about that Christology? Where I can have like the Father and Son be distinct in some sense, right? Without making of some fallacy of composition, they would be formally distinct, but they are essentially one hypostasis.
Yeah. So I mean, getting to the Christology part, I mean, it's just basically the reduplicative predication move. You're just saying that with respect to the human nature and with respect to divine nature, and each one of those are parts or parts of the Son or
No,
Christ
no, no,
or whatever label you want to give.
no, not reduplicative predication. Specificative qual predication.
Well, you're saying that they're parts, correct?
Yes,
Yeah, and
analogical
each
parts.
part is what. Yeah, and each part is what makes the statement true, and that predicate then gets eventually applied to the person as a whole.
Yeah, but that's a little different than I would feel like, because I don't want to turn it into,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just want to.
It seems like a bit of a back and forth. I tried
But
to.
what I was, just to clarify my position,
Mhm.
specification what is typically understood in mereological terms, where Christ is a composite being which admits of divine and human parts in virtue of the divine properties being predicable of some part. They are predicable of the whole Christ. I think reduplicative qua distinction um, would have propositions are those in qua taken as to modify the proposition rather than the grammatical component thereof. So you can have, I think there's kind of a distinction between the specificative qua and the reduplicative qua. So an example of that would be if the subject of both conjuncts are the same substituents of, let's say, in, are univocal across the conjunction, then the reduplication predicate being something of X and the predicates being something of something different of X, then being in is entailed by being that one something, and not of being in is being entailed by being something else, right? And so then the reduplicative form of the predication accomplished uh, doesn't really accomplish anything, but kind of muddies the waters of where we have this differentiation.
Okay, I mean, I can respond, but I'll just leave it there because we're running out of time here. I'll have time for one more question if you want.
Okay. There's a lot of people asking me questions right now. Um. Lorenzo Vienna. Okay. Let's. Okay. 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 Let's bring up Lorenzo, I guess. Vienna texted me a question, so that's why I can't bring him up. But who dropped Lorenzo? Where is he? Okay, let me just let's make it easier. I'm gonna ask the question that Vienna texted me. It's a friend of mine named Vienna. So he mentioned something called Pansychism. He said he says this is like a thought experiment of his. He says he's asking about your thoughts on a local panpsychist view of the mind of Christ. The human mind of Jesus would be micro mind, which is this distinct form, yet unified to the divine mind, and a distinct human micro mind from the divine mind is perfectly receptive to it when it does exist. So it's unique personal union. Their harmony would be akin to how harmony works in normative global panpsychism. And I'll send the entire text in the side chat because it is a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, I think hold on, let me just read this here. Yeah, panpsychism. Okay. Where is it? Distinct human micro mind from the divine mind is perfectly receptive to it. Okay, I mean, I have to ask more about what he means by that. The human, the distinct human micro mind from the divine mind is perfectly receptive to it. So, does that mean it receives all knowledge, for example? I don't know. I don't know what he imagines. I mean, it's better to give a concrete example
Yeah.
when it comes to, let's say, Jesus knowing everything in his divine mind and not knowing everything in his human mind. If the human mind is fully receptive to it, such that it knows everything, then yeah, then there's really no distinction there.
Yes. Yeah, so sorry. I should have had him give more example. I know time is running out right now.
Yeah, I
Let's
just
do
have one quick question. I don't want it to be a
wait
discussion.
real
Just one
quick,
quick question.
Lorenzo. I'm just gonna ask him real quick. Jake, would you mind answering this question? Because I don't want to hold you down for too long.
Yeah, sure. And then
Okay,
I'm
then.
gonna
Yeah,
have to go.
Okay, inshallah.
yeah.
Lorenzo,
It's
you'll
not.
be the
I'm
last
not going to
question
turn
then.
this into a debate, but my question would be: do you believe that LPI works if a Christian predicates these things of Christ under second order logic?
Do I say that again? Sorry.
Yeah. So, do you believe the logical problem of the incarnation works if a Christian predicates these things of Christ under second order logic?
Yeah.
All right. That was the question. The answer was yeah. There isn't much we can really go back and forth. I don't want to hold him down for too long. Thank you so much, brother Jake. I'm sorry that we held you for a little longer. We appreciate it. We'll love the presentation and the questions and answers. You're a big inspiration to everyone here. We appreciate it. Wallah.
Alhamdulillah. All right, thanks for having me, guys, and I hope that this was beneficial at the very least, inshallah.
بارك الله فيك brother Jake.
Barakallahu feek.
All right,
Assalamu
so
alaikum.
وعليكم
wa alaikum
السلام
assalam wa
ورحمة الله
rahmatullahi wa
وبركاته.
barakatuh. All right, that concludes the event, inshallah.